Getting ready for a live broadcast for you with some special stuff that's on file. Glenn will join us here for a conversation on the Department of Vengeance, essentially. I want to let you know about a few articles that are out. Reminder, sort of in context to where we're at. Shock Troops under the Crime Boss, which is about the Oath Keepers and what's happening right now with the DOJ trying to essentially reset the clock. And then we have behind that The Son and the Seditious Father, which was also followed up with a live broadcast with Dakota Adams here a couple of nights ago. Then our interview last night with Mark Zaid, which was the Tulsi Gabbard versus the Truth. And also we had some coverage of several of the other cases related to Tulsi Gabbard rolling back the clock, the attack on the officers I know he's representing. The cases with Kash Patel and his lawyer, since he's gone up against that lawyer before. And then, of course, the hybrid warfare of the Russians, which he covered really well. So that article is also up in place along with the interview. So the Tulsi Gabbard versus the Truth from yesterday. And then was very pleased to put out an article I've been kind of penning away at a while called Lawfare Director. The FBI director is suing journalism. And it was put out late last night. And then we had an update that our friend Frank Figluzzi won a dismissal in a case. So the case is built around a whole bunch of different cases that Kash Patel has used to weaponize his place in the FBI seat and kind of changed how we see this department, which leads us to today's article as we wait for Glenn to join us. And it's going to be the topic of our discussion tonight called "The Government Just Indicted the People Who Were Watching the Nazis. America's most effective civil rights organization now faces federal destruction for doing exactly what the FBI does every day." Because was I shocked that they were trying to harass the SPLC? No. Is it dangerous? Yes. The SPLC, whether you criticize them or not, the SPLC does a lot of invaluable work understanding extremism in a way that requires a whole lot of focus. And the worst part about this indictment is that they outed the information that was collectively gathered, and sources essentially could be implied from what was in the article, or what was in the indictment, sorry. And it wouldn't take long to suss out who the different officials were that were working with different, in these different organizations who were working with the SPLC, especially if you were in the organization. So, not very happy about that. It's very similar to a lot of work that I was doing in a different capacity, and a lot of different individuals around the world do that elsewhere. To be honest with you, like people who work in counter extremism in Europe and England, they run into certain problems that we didn't really have in America, where actually having extremist material was a problem without a whole lot of wrangling with the government. So that's one thing. But when you have the government essentially accusing you of creating, this is the most insane part of the claim, of creating extremism, it's really it's kind of maddening. So we will have an expert in this category in many ways join us here shortly, and one of our busiest friends. I don't know if you get a chance to see. I know a lot of our friends are watching a lot of the channels here on this Substack network, if you will, and it's I think it's a really good benefit that we can be in touch directly with some of the experts that took the time on cable access to share their wisdom and experience more directly with us. And now, you know, uh, for some for a low price, or at least low subscription rate, you can get really good information nearly every day. And unfortunately, I think this is really one of the sad things is that some of these people are directly targeted by the various individuals we're talking about. Olivia Troy, Frank Figluzzi, others have been essentially targets directly by the various officials that we see in office, including Michael Flynn, who's not in office now, but still has some power, and obviously Kash Patel. And that's why it was important to talk last night with Mark Zaid, who has represented a lot of people in these positions, and it's a full blown fight. So, yeah, I wouldn't want to be there. SPLC, I have some friends who've been around that network before. I haven't talked to a lot of them because I wasn't thinking about having to do this in the middle of war. It's day 1,470 something for me, 1,500 plus for Ukraine, full scale invasion, and yet this topic doesn't stop in America. Instead of having something where we have a rational government, an actual Department of Justice, rules that are at least neutral, apolitical as it was supposed to be, we don't. And that's creating a problem both obviously domestically, but internationally. There are a lot of people here who are concerned by the lack of stabilization in America's politic. It's policy-oriented sphere, not just because of how it affects Ukraine. Obviously, that's part of it, but there's a belief that without that stability, what comes next? And I think that's really the biggest question: is what happens when those structures start falling apart? What happens when those structures cease to uphold their perceived end of the bargain? And it's the biggest part of the frustration of this to read this SPLC case because um, I know people in that organization. I know the work that I did not in that organization. And we don't do it trying to. In fact, I used to have people say when I was hauling in ISIS materials and doing examinations, my friends said, "What would you do if the feds ever knocked on the door?" I'd say, I'd sit down and get them coffee and show them how to do the data haul so we can get some shit done. There's a lot, there's a lot to cover. It's a full time gig. And I would always usually have to explain that they can't really, from my understanding at least, the federal agencies can't do the same thing. They have to go through a lot of procedure to be able to just monitor things that I, as a citizen, could go find, make an assessment, write a report, send that report in, let said agency decide what to do with it. A lot of times, to be honest, to be ignored at first. And isn't that what they were encouraging us to do after 9/11? See something, say something, to be essentially helpful from where we were in the capacities that we could. And I think that one of the things that bothers me most is that the way in which things like the topic of Antifa got weaponized simply to cover crimes eventually of Jan 6 and now crimes under the current administration. Um, you know, Confusion in the average population that wouldn't know Antifa from Proud Boys from Oath Keepers. I know people who really couldn't make a distinction out of any of these things, honestly. They may know, left from right, and they may know Trump bad, etc., but they don't necessarily think about these. They're busy going on about their lives. And I know that when it comes to wanting to apply a certain amount of resources to a potential threat, you have to have a sense of where the real threat is versus edgelording, or where the real threat is versus things that just you don't like. Um, in 2020, there were plenty of accounts posting things that were edgelordy. Sometimes, if I found them to be, and when I say funny, I don't mean that I find them personally funny, but I mechanically find that they will deliver humor. Um, I was a little less worried about that account because that account likes attention. It was the accounts that were persistently and with a certain edge calling for violent action during the elections. Um, People who we could see cross bridging between a public platform like on Twitter and maybe Parler into ones that were on Telegram and elsewhere. Um, Sometimes you run out of a way which you can burrow your way in, but at least you know where that's at. And that's why when you see the Proud Boy um, texts, the signal groups, and the same thing with Oath Keepers, I know it's true what's in the indictment because I was adjacent to it. In fact, I still have the Telegram accounts right here on the desktop. So that's part of what's frustrating about what's going on with this is that we have a strong attempt to simply eradicate the record and thinking that our U.S. government is still at least going to be in this position now for another year with because even with midterms, let's say there's a full-blown victory against Donald Trump, it's going to take time to get into office. There will be machinations along the way, as there often have been, and it's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot to do, a lot to go. So hopefully we will have some insight to that. Waiting for Glenn to join us again. I hope that you guys have been taking care of yourself in America right now. It's a little crazy trying to see what's on the news feed with you guys because I just get to see it from CNN.com and a few other websites that are not quite, getting out of the narrow sphere of Iran, the basically the catastrophe that is the PR campaigns around Donald Trump, and some of the scandals that are happening around Congress. So I don't know about your gas price situations. If you have some things like that that are taking over your focus, we'll see if we can get some shows that are going about those issues. Here in Ukraine, it's been quiet. We had an air raid, actually, an attack fairly early in the evening, around 5. A couple of drones. Our guys took care of the problem fairly quickly, and it went back to essentially a very quiet afternoon where I could finish reading some of the material that was coming in about these cases, especially um, the unfolding of the case with Cash Patel versus everybody, and that in uh, his own filing, there are contradictions that were glaring. Hey, good man.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
Well, I was telling our crowd here we have an ever evolving Department of Justice that you just have to keep your eye on the ball and pay attention because the headline may change at any moment. But one, I want to congratulate you really on your transition from being the one that was sort of the hired seat that would be in, and you've really done well on these platforms. And I think that one of the reasons why I want to say that is that we have viewers that they want your voice. They want that experience that you bring during this chaos. So thank you for being here. And again, great job on your work you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and it's been an interesting professional chapter too. I did not think when I retired from the Department of Justice that this is what I would be doing.
Hmm.
Um, and then transitioning from MSNBC to independent media has been pretty liberating. But the whole thing is still kind of a surprise to me after more than 30 years as a Fed. Now I don't know what they call me, an influencer, a content creator. I just run my mouth about what I know. That's what I do.
Well, I think it's in the borderline work of journalism that I've been doing, and the fact that you help divine what's going on that are in these gears is what our viewers like. So, what I'd like to do is kind of bring us, let the crowd come in and settle in fairly quick. So, I think we got pretty good quorum here. Also, I'd like to say I always like how you greet so many of your viewers. It's a very, very awesome thing you do. Um, in 2020, I wrote a report that was predicting essentially what became the insurrection. Didn't have the details of what the final attack would be. That evolved. There's a guy named Frank Figluzzi who was also on television at that time. We had Dakota Adams was on with me the other night, whose father was part of that. Mark Zaid was on last night, who represented police officers who were attacked by that. So all of us have a stake in this. We have something personal about what this violation of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys did to our democracy and our government. And I wanted to hear from the prosecutor, someone who I really respect, and thank you for what you've been saying lately. I want to hear your personal side of it, that kind of angst, and then your take on where we're at with that.
Yeah, so I feel like I have lots of personal connections, not just because they attacked and tried to bring an end to my democracy, our democracy, but
Amen.
first and foremost, I worked murder cases with Mike Fanone, I don't know, a quarter of a century ago.
Wow.
He and I actually traveled to the farthest throes of rural Virginia getting after a killer who I had prosecuted in D.C., but he was also wanted down in southwestern Virginia, rather, and Mike and I traveled there together with lots of other folks, detectives, evidence technicians, witnesses. It's a very long story, but so I have known Mike for a very long time.
Wow.
And when they beat him nearly to death on January 6th, yeah, that was, one of my friends, one of my former coworkers, colleagues, and I took it very personally. I have since come to know all four of the guys, the kind of four heroes of January 6th, the face of law enforcement heroism: Harry Dunn, of course, Mike Fanone, Aquilino Gonell, and Daniel Hodges. And I've become fast friends with all of them. And then the other really personal connection is the lead prosecutors who handled the Oath Keepers trials, plural, and the Proud Boys trial were some of my, not just former colleagues, but former supervisees, because many of them started as homicide AUSAs, Assistant United States Attorneys, in my homicide section when I was chief. Some of them I tried cases with. Kate Riccozzi, who was just among the best of the best and was one of the de facto leads on the Oath Keepers trials. I tried Kate's first murder trial with her. And as I have often said about her, I probably learned more from her than she learned from me trying cases with her. So I sat in those courtrooms. I was covering the trials for MSNBC, but I was watching my friends, former colleagues, and trial partners, the prosecutors, bring those people to justice, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. And, frankly, I would have preferred to be at counsel table as a prosecutor myself rather than sitting in the audience as a journalist covering it for MSNBC. So those are my most direct and personal connections. Of course, so many of my friends ended up being wrongfully terminated or demoted for working cases that had been assigned to them, and not just righteous cases. Some of the most important, most consequential prosecutions our country has ever seen. They took, and when I have a hard time, I'm a gutter kid from Jersey, so I try to keep the cussing to a minimum, but I'm not always successful.
I'm not just Houston, I'm East Side Houston. I get it.
When I see Janine Pirro, who is now the U.S. Attorney at my former beloved professional home, when I see her, and before her, Ed Stop the Steal Martin, when he was interim U.S. Attorney, taking some of the best, not just homicide prosecutors, national security prosecutors, public corruption prosecutors that our country has to offer, because they were working at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office on January 6 cases, and demoting them down to misdemeanors, grunt work. Misdemeanors are important. I'm not being disrespectful of that work, but you don't take your nation's most accomplished prosecutors in those arenas and bust them down to misdemeanor work. That is actually a public safety concern to the people of Washington, D.C. and the nation. So that's another very personal connection I have to what we are contending with right now.
And the thing is you spent all those years basically upholding the law as a particular role on behalf of the people. That is essentially who you represent in your job. Yes.
Yes, we represent the people. I stood up every day in court, said Glenn Kirschner for the United States, and I could not have been more honored to represent the people.
Mm. And you know, because when a lot of people when they think prosecutor, like, oh, especially with TV, you know, it's like prosecutor is sort of the difficult guy, but you're the voice of who we need to uphold our teeth into the violations of the law. And what I'd like to know is can you think of any cases in all the years that you worked where some equivalent to this, even with a little latitude, um, they came along well after it was established that a conspiracy had happened. Um, Aside from the fact that this is sedition as well, which is hard to get to at a whole nother level, where this has ever occurred. Do you have any experience where this has occurred?
This being, we're living in
So
the
the
legal
Department of
upside
Justice,
down.
sorry,
Yeah.
the Department of Justice attempt to eliminate what happened with Oath Keepers and Proud Boys in particular. Sorry.
No, it's insane that they're trying to whitewash history first from the courts by not only delivering pardons and, cleansing the Department of Justice of heroic public servants who brought these people to justice. They're trying to now dismiss convictions in cases that are over and done. The only time I ever saw and I was ever involved in revisiting an old conviction was when
Hmm.
there was some new DNA evidence, some newly discovered
Precisely.
evidence that came to our attention. And then I wanted to make sure that whatever conviction we obtained in the first instance was right and was just. And if it wasn't, we were going to make it right. We were going to remedy it. What people may not kind of know intuitively about prosecutors, the good ones, and most of us are good ones,
Hmm.
we also vigorously protect the rights of those that we investigate, those that we prosecute, those that
Hmm.
we convict. We are there to represent the Constitution. Yes, the interests of the people, but I'll tell you, if we think we got something wrong, then we're going to work to make it right because we are there to make sure the constitutional rights of everybody are honored,
Right.
including the defendants. But no, I've never, I don't think, George Orwell could have envisioned what today's federal government, specifically executive branch, has become.
No, and I don't think we have a decision yet from the judge, although I think they put a timetable on one of the filings to try to get that last week, so we still have some limbo. I want to, before we pivot to the part of Cash Patel with the SPLC, I want to remind our viewers here that day before yesterday, I spoke to Dakota Adams, the son of Stuart Rhodes, Oath Keepers founder, and to remind us that at home, one of the things that you know from your job as a prosecutor is not just what they do to people in the public, they did to the largest population, but also the monster they bring back home. One of the things I've noticed with good prosecutors is that's where the anger and the kind of righteousness in your belly fires from. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Using pardons to further endanger the public. We have seen some of the J6ers who Trump pardoned go out and reoffend, including, committing some of the most heinous crimes against children. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
think Donald Trump cares one whit what he has wrought. You know, he has actually created additional victims by delivering pardons that should never, never have been delivered in the first instance.
And what about this restitution idea that's been floated around that they could actually cash in on their crimes?
And I'll tell you, that's one of the things that has me so upset about these attempted dismissals of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys convictions,
Mm-hmm.
because they're trying to make the court complicit, tacitly complicit,
Mm-hmm.
but complicit nonetheless in their quest to steal our tax dollars. Because what Janine Pirro put, and her name is on the motion to dismiss, what she put in the motion is that this is in the interests of justice to dismiss these cases against the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. And I'll tell you, if the judges grant the motions to dismiss, they will essentially be co signing that factual assertion by Jeanine Pirro, and that will give the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys ammunition to hold up that dismissal and say, you see, even the judges agree I was wrongfully prosecuted. Now I want millions of dollars of taxpayer money to make me whole, just like Mike Flynn pulled, just like Steve Bannon is trying to pull, just like the Ashley Babbitt, who was
Right.
breaching the Capitol, trying to get at our legislators, trying to stop the certification of a presidential election. They gave her a payout. This is, I mean, you can't make this up, and it is the rule of law turned on its head.
It's maddening. And again, for our viewers, I mean, I was a counterterrorism researcher. I was monitoring all this in slow motion. I have all the documents. So, from different angles, we have seen this go down in slow motion and role reverse itself, where a lot of people in my field would go, why do I want to do this again? I mean, what was the point? We would do it because it's the right thing to do. So it brings me to a group that actually does this work, which is one of the reasons why I'm very glad you joined us right now. If you had told me that the Department of Justice was going to go after the SPLC, now in Trump land, it wouldn't have surprised me, just like it isn't surprising me. But I know what they do, and I know how they serve the public good for, announcing a lot of information about extremists. From a prosecutor's point of view, how important is the work groups like that do to help you guys achieve a better, just society for us?
Going after an organization that goes after the KKK, you would think our government would embrace organizations that are going after that kind of, horrific racism and extremism. Um, and when I didn't really do a deep dive into the lawsuit against the Southern Poverty Legal Center, Law Center. And then when I started to look at it, including your great reporting on it, Chris,
Thank you.
it made my blood begin to boil because it is such a ruse being perpetrated by Todd Blanche and Kash Patel when they say, well, they were giving money to people inside these organizations, to which I instantly thought, that's exactly what our law enforcement agencies
Right.
do. That's exactly what our intelligence agencies do, because that's how you infiltrate those organizations. Chris, I did a version of that when I would covertly arrest a member of a gang and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to flip that person without the other gang members knowing. We would silently flip them. We would release them back out into the gang, and then
Right.
they would provide us information we needed to take the entire gang down. And if somebody were to say, yeah, Glenn, you see, that's you supporting the criminal efforts of this gang, I would say, are y'all effing kidding me? We see what you're doing. The good news is, Chris, I have a feeling this will fall apart. Just like,
Yeah.
I just like we saw James Comey's prosecution, Letitia James' prosecution, they couldn't even competently issue subpoenas against Jerome Powell or the Fed. I think the Abrego Garcia, not to mix apples and oranges, criminal
Yeah.
case is about to fall apart. These people can't prosecute straight. They can't shoot straight. Now, they can put people through hell
Mm.
in the interim, hiring lawyers, being dragged through vindictive court proceedings. But you know what? With every failed prosecution, and I suspect this one will fail as well, Donald Trump and his flunkies, his lapdogs, his sycophants become weaker, not stronger. Why? Because you're exposing that the wannabe dictator doesn't have the power to pull off successful prosecutions. That emboldens people to stand up to him. At least that's the way I see
That's
it.
right. And then you had Judge Moss ruling. I don't miss any of your briefings, good bro. So thank you for your good video. So about Trump's immunity and where we may be, in a couple of years, should we be able to get to that point.
Oh, yeah.
Give us some glean, give us some good shiny.
Yeah, I was so excited to see Judge Amit Mehta rule that Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity from a civil suit for what he did on and around January 6th. The implications of that ruling moving forward to a time when Donald Trump leaves power, and he will leave power, that will give DOJ, it will give the federal prosecutors the opportunity to rebring the criminal case for the January 6th crimes, 4 felonies, for which he stood indicted until he got reelected. So the reason it's so important is because when that case got dismissed, when Donald Trump got reelected, the criminal case, Judge Chutkan was in the process of litigating whether what Donald Trump did on and around January 6th should enjoy presidential immunity against prosecution or survives the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. I feel confident saying she would have ruled that these were not official acts of a president of the United States.
Right.
These were the acts of a candidate / private person. So we can proceed to trial. Now we have a virtually identical ruling on the same facts that Judge Chutkan was in the process of litigating from Judge Mehta, saying, of course, there's no immunity for what he did on January 6th. So the civil suit filed by the police officers who were at the Capitol that day and the Democratic legislators, that civil suit can move forward. But you know what? It is a really important tell for how that issue should be resolved in the future when and if the criminal case is rebrought. And it better be rebrought if we want to keep our republic.
Well, and sort of a final thought here, a little room for you to just say how you'd like to say it to this great crowd that really enjoys your work. I can see they're piled in here right now, 600 people. Can't wait to hear what wisdom you have. Young people who get into law right now, like I would say, if someone came to me and said, "I'm going to get into counterterrorism," we're going like, "Why? Like, you get your head examined. It's crazy work. You don't want to do this. This is not for the." I would probably talk a lot of people out of doing my work, but we need people who will. What would you say to people who are trying to get into law, or more importantly, they're stuck in the system now, and this is so chaotic? What's their role right now from your point of view?
Yeah. So, first of all, I never in my life thought I would tell an aspiring prosecutor, somebody who wanted to join the Department of Justice, don't do it. But now is not the time to do it. And I mourn that as I'm saying it, but I couldn't in good conscience tell anybody to go work for Todd Blanche, because unfortunately the Department of Justice has lost its bearing, and it is no longer doing the work of the American people. It's doing the work of dear leader in the Oval Office. But if people are contemplating going to law school, they're in law school, they've passed the bar and they're entering the legal profession, we always need great prosecutors, and we always need great criminal defense attorneys. So if that's the kind of work you gravitate toward, do it on the state level. Do it. We have district attorneys' offices, Commonwealth's attorneys' offices, states' attorneys' offices in all the 50 states and in Washington, D.C. And that is where 98, 99% of the criminal litigation, both prosecution and criminal defense, gets done. Go there, build your skills. And when the rule of law comes back into the light of day at the Department of Justice, and I absolutely believe it will, you're going to be all the more better equipped to come in and then help us. I intend to go back. I would probably be back in government if Kamala Harris was president right now, because I retired reluctantly after a little over 30 years, but I can't not go back and be part of the cleanup and accountability mission. So there's going to be so much work to repair and reform and rebuild the Department of Justice, and to hold accountable every last Trump associated person who's committing crimes against the American people out in the harsh light of day. They're doing it openly and notoriously. Those people will have to be brought to justice, or else I don't think we get to keep our republic. Because if we fail on the accountability mission the third time, at least the third time, Richard Nixon in 74, we failed to hold accountable. Donald Trump in 2021, we failed to hold accountable. If we fail a third time, what we're doing is sending the signal that we just don't care if people try to destroy American democracy. committing crimes in the process. We don't care, and we're not going to hold you accountable. That is a recipe for the end of American democracy.
Well, and I think that I would agree with a lot of people here. We look to voices like yours as sort of light in the middle of a lot of this crazy darkness. But I think you and I would agree that we want these viewers and our citizens to wake up to their own personal role and potential in this, so that we don't hope that we have like a magic person who solves it for us, but that each one of us finds our particular role in there.
Yeah, engage everybody, engaging in every way
Yeah.
you can. I mean, we've been doing phone banking for the last couple of weeks for
Yes.
Virginia. The proposition,
I heard you had some state changes.
some state changes.
It kind of made the news today.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, listen, listen. We didn't pick this fight, right? But if Texas wanted to start it, then we're
I'm
going to
from
finish
Texas.
it,
They picked
right?
it there. They changed our
Yeah,
map too
we're going
many
to take off the
times.
gloves, but the point is engaging, whether it's phone banking, whether it's like
Yeah.
my wife, who I call my better three quarters, not my better half, because she's just that good.
Amen.
She does
Amen.
all of the postcard writing until her hand falls off. I mean, everybody can engage in their own way, and you know what? Engaging feels good, and
Yeah.
the more people that engage, the better shot we have. So there are a lot of good reasons to engage.
Well, we keep our eye on the pulse, and just like you said, you can't retire. I can't seem to retire either. I know this stuff pretty well with these extremists. I have the entire Epic server of the Oath Keeper stuff, Proud Boys stuff. We're not going to let them forget. We bring on like Daniel Hodges and Sergeant Gannell on. We keep these voices alive, and I appreciate your time here, and I appreciate our viewers really focusing in on everything that you're saying. They pack your broadcast, bro, and I think
Yeah,
that's
well,
awesome.
we have a great community. As many of them know, we do community meetings every night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, talk about the legal issue of the day, talk about how we can engage. Sometimes we do some fun stuff, some true crime talk. So it's a great, great community we have here on Substack.
Well, we'll see you soon, my man. And to
All right.
everyone else, take care of yourself. We actually have a lot more of this topic coming because it's evolving on a daily level. So pay attention to all of Glenn's posts, all the wiretap posts here, and we will see you soon. Slava Ukraini, Heroim Slava, I Pizdeць Російської Федерації.